All right, I'm with Madeline Davis. Madeline, talk to me before we get going. Talk to me a little bit about where you are as a writer.
I am mostly a hopeful writer, working on my first full-length novel. So yeah, lots of aspiring potential. But yeah, working on an historical fantasy that's uh, a lot of fun and a lot more work than I initially thought. But I have good hope of turning into something that I won't completely shove away for forever.
Nice. Well, as long as it's still fun, that's the important part. You got to stay motivated. Okay, so we're working on your character today. I'm going to share my screen so we can both look at the piece. There we go. Um, so we're working on your character today, Elanor, who is a princess who has a brother named Raymond. And you wrote me and said that you were struggling a little bit with her voice. So talk to me about how you want her to sound. What are you hoping for her?
Well, she's a little conflicted. I want her to sound tentative, um, that she's trying to manage things but uncertain of herself still. And so her attempts to do things are supposed to reflect that so that
Gotcha.
she comes across as, yeah, doing things that sometimes she's wishing she could do something else or that she could do it more decisively, but she kind of undermines herself even in that respect.
Is it when she tries, do things naturally go wrong, or is she trying the wrong thing?
A bit both. So some of it is, yeah, other people being more certain of themselves than her, and so she, yeah, just it shrinks from the conflict that, like for example, the first character interaction with Marianne. Marianne doesn't have any problems jumping into something that is is wrong and questionable, but she's
Okay.
certain of it, and so even though Eleanor knows she has the right, she's just a little bit more hesitant to engage.
Okay.
But then sometimes, yeah, things happen and she's not as confident to just push forward when she knows, okay, I want this banquet to go smoothly. And if people keep talking about dragons, that'll not work out. So this is the course of action. I need to stop the minstrel. I need to do this. She's not able to just step forward and take the action to accomplish her goals that she needs
Okay.
to. Yeah.
So in her, and she's very internal,
Yeah.
um, which I think you're actually doing the last time we talked. I know you were struggling with that. I think this chapter is much better, um, capturing her interior voice. So I definitely see improvement in her. Just to encourage you. It's this chapter is better than the first time we talked, than the first one you showed me. But I see a little bit where you're struggling. Let me ask a couple more questions about her voice before we jump into like what you're doing and how I think you might be able to adjust her a little bit. These kind of internal characters are really hard. I just want to, because with a character that talks a lot, with like an external character, you always have the ability for them to like speak their motivations, and that allows the reader to connect to their motivations. But with Elanor, she's never going to speak her motivations. So we got to find different ways for her to clarify what it is that she wants. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah. Um, and I can feel the like struggle, and that like because she's so internal and she's so conflicted, because you're writing the conflicted really well. Um, but it's the struggle is that it's bending negative right now,
Mhm.
and making her unlikable, which I know is not your intention. Um, so
Yes
talk,
and no.
okay, so
About the
talk to me about that.
likability. I do want her to be responsible in a certain measure for what happens to her later. So
Okay,
her getting kidnapped by the dragon, surprise, is not just something that just happens to her. That there's a certain element of guilt in her being seduced by the dragon sorcerer that I
okay,
want to be a problem that has to get resolved. So it's not just, okay, she gets rescued by the dragon, that needs to be fixed in a lot more long-term way.
Okay.
But I know that even still, like, so the brother, even when his guilt is more apparent there, I know that he's already more relatable, and I think they need to be a little more balanced in that way because he's.
Yeah, I would agree. He is more charming. And people, part of what's I think hurting Elanor is that we interpret the characters how the other characters in the book respond to them. So
Mm,
like people respond very positively to her brother, which makes him feel charming when we read him. People do not respond positively to her. So it makes us feel like, oh, she's kind of an odd duck. Um,
mhm,
which it's fine to be an odd duck if we can paint her internal motivations as more positive. Does that make
mhm.
sense? Not
Yeah.
that she wants positive things, but that there's some empathy and relatability for us to grab into.
Right.
Yeah. Um, okay, one more thing. No, let's just jump in. Does that sound good? I think
Yeah.
I get what you're going for now. Anything else about Eleanor I haven't asked about that you're going for?
I think that covers a lot. The dynamic between her and the queen isn't as present here as the first chapter, so
Hmm.
I guess I'm okay with it not being there, but I was wondering if that would feel like a drop off because the queen is here, but she's actually not very involved in a lot of ways. So if it feels like, oh, we shifted just completely, or if it's like, well, if she's present in the scene, should Eleanor's thoughts about that relation be present somewhere?
I don't,
Or if that doesn't feel like a
well,
connection.
I'm going to really encourage you in this chapter to make and in every chapter that you write from Eleanor's POV, to make her positive motivations. Because, like you said, well, you said her motivation for this banquet is that she really wants it to go well.
Right. Yeah.
I don't get that at all in the piece.
Okay.
So we need to bring that to the forefront. Um, I think part of what's happening is you've got her so conflicted that we often lose the um positive side of what she's looking for. Does that make sense?
Right.
I think you're assuming the positive and making the conflict clear, which just leans her toward the negative. So I'm
Mm.
going to push you to make her positive. Yeah, so let's take it a beat at a time and just talk about if you were to keep it. I think there's some ways you could rearrange it to situate her better in position, but let's assume right now that you're going to keep it exactly in the structure it is. And let's just talk about little things you can add to her voice to make her more relatable. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Are you okay with that plan?
Yeah. I think especially because I liked your suggestion about, oh, well, over here we have a positive memory
Hmm.
here, but in terms of ordering, I felt, yeah, that it still
Yeah.
needed to happen there.
Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. So let's grab it a piece at a time. So right here you have your opening paragraph for the scene, and it's really good. It's very descriptive all around the perimeter of the castle great halls, torches blazed, unmatched liveliness. Eleanor stood by her seated table, waiting for her brother to arrive to sit on her left, to the right of the queen's table center, and for the Baron Embassy, the southern provinces to sit on her right. All the dinner preparations were finally in place. Skipping down a little bit, though she hoped Raymond wouldn't be late, that it only happened once, a very memorable occasion for multiple reasons, and she thought he would never be late again, but still. So we've got this. This is what I'm talking about you bringing the conflict without bringing the positive motivation.
Mm.
It sounds here like her concern is not that dinner will go well, that the banquet will go well, but that Raymond would be on time. And so it positions her in this place of judgment
Mm.
because you're missing the piece of, I really want this to go well. All we get is the Raymond is going to be late, and that's going to make me anxious. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, I think in a way it reflects how she sees it. She's less, oh yes, the dinner's almost perfect, except for this could happen. That she is herself a little bit more
Yeah,
focused
yeah,
on negative. But I see what you mean, that the
yeah.
positive positive motivation isn't very
And
stated.
having a character, so this is something we struggle with, and this I think you're doing that really well. She is very focused on the negative through this whole piece. The problem is those characters aren't very likable. And so you fight you fight a giant uphill battle having a character that is very anxious and negative all the time because your reader doesn't want to hang out with them. So there's two ways to overcome it. The first way is we add into her some positivity so that she doesn't just come off as negative, but she comes off more as anxious and conflicted, right? She comes off less as like a negative person and more as a worrier.
Mm,
So that's
yeah.
one way to go. So if we're gonna phrase this first paragraph as worrier, all the dinner preparations were finally in place, and she only had to wait for the meal to begin shortly. Period. She hoped this night would be perfect, not just for the guests so that they would enjoy themselves, but because she knew that her mother would think positively of her if this went well. Does that make sense? So like giving that like here's the positive motivation of what I'm hoping for, and it helps us relate to her. Like, oh yeah, we want this to be perfect too. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, very helpful because Warrior is a lot truer to her character than
Yeah,
just
and then you can transition and have this moment of like, the only thing that could really make this go wrong is if Raymond were late.
and the irony is it's not what makes the dinner go
No,
wrong.
yeah, it's
That's
not. But
great.
that's her internal thought, right?
Right.
Like, yeah,
Yeah. No, that's
her
great. I
internal
really
thought.
like
Yeah. So of course she's gonna be the one that kind of botches it in the end, but her internal thought at the beginning is like, I want this to go perfect, giving us that positive, like, and tell us why she wants it to be perfect. She wants to be perfect because it's an important meal. She wants it to be perfect because she wants to impress her mother. She wants it to be perfect because she realizes this is her job, right? Like this is her job to make things perfect. So like help us
that.
get behind her positive motivations. I said there were two ways. The other way to make an unlikable character likable is to give them a sidekick who really, really likes them.
Yeah. That happens
Even if they're
actually
negative.
later with
Yeah,
her, but
that'll
isn't
help.
possible here.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be possible here, but that's just the other way as you're writing. Know that like we can have an unlikable character as long as someone else in the cast really, really likes them. And we'll do this weird thing where we're like, oh, I guess there is something likable there. And then we start to like them too. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It's
definitely
this
true. It's
yeah,
weird though.
it's this very weird like um we're looking for a reason to empathize with the character. And so if the character, like right now, Eleanor's pretty tough to empathize with. If the character's tough to empathize with, we at a minimum need some other character to be like, no, 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 she's cool. And then we'll be like, okay, I guess she is. Right. Like, so yeah, it's that kind of like, okay, we just need some in. So I think that's a good first start. You have the second paragraph here. Well, and I won't focus on every paragraph like this, but just to get these first paragraphs are so important. You have the second paragraph here, where she's kind of, you know, filling the time before everybody comes in. Well, there was nothing else she could do about it. In the meantime, she'd survey the gathering, and she marveled at the light danced across the figures of the wall tapestries, as well as the living faces of the diners now filling the rank table. Royal households, the court, and you list off kind of who's there. That was deliberate to facilitate the conversation. A detail she'd been attentive to hospitality, though no one would be sitting across from her at the high table that faced the rest of the diocese. And that's important because you're gonna have this moment later where she has to be able to like see the room. Occupying the Baron to her right was her principal duty, and she would attend to it. and to her brother, though that was a different matter. So you give us this shot here about, and to her brother, though that was a different matter. And because you don't tell us why it's a different matter, we assume she's judging him again for like being late or being a scoundrel or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes
But
from the continuation.
yeah, but I know because I've talked to you that she's actually very positive about her brother.
Right. Well, there is a mixture that
Yeah.
she isn't uncritical, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um it's a more complicated thing than,
It's a
you
more
know,
complicated thing than just
a
like
chit
I'm
chat with the Baron is not hard, you know. That's a
yeah, yeah.
diplomatic tour, but it's, you know, it's
Yeah.
manageable. Raymond is a different kind of minefield to
Yeah. So
deal
and
with.
I would express that here so that we can empathize with her.
Mhm.
Right. And her brother, though that was a different matter, period. Um, who knew what direction conversation with him would go? Sometimes it was delightful and could brighten the night, but other times it could send the night, it could swirl the night into chaos. And tonight she couldn't have chaos, right? Like keep coming back to her like positive motivation of like, I've got to make this perfect. Does that make sense? And it'll
Mhm.
pay off at the end. When you get to the end and there's the big disruption that she kind of causes, this desire to have this be this wonderful thing will pay off.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay. Um, so then we get Marianne coming here, quite a gathering, yet so drab. Marianne remarks, so, rather than the heavy gray, don't you think? Marianne herself wore a dress of purple. Right? Like so, Marianne comes in and immediately starts talking about how the party is drab. Elanor agrees, right? And kind of like reflects on the clothing and then says Easter will be here soon enough though. So again, we put her in this position of judging people. First she's judging her brother, and now she's agreeing with Marianne's judgment that everyone is drab. And I get what you're going for. What you said earlier was that like she doesn't want to fight with Marianne.
Yeah, I part of it was I wanted it to be like, this is actually something that she perceives and that she's giving into, that sh aside from, you know, trying to put in the description of this is what it looks like, you know, the impression of dark colors to her is oppressive. It is
Yeah.
kind of part of it is her projecting, you know, her feeling kind of boxed in, but also the way the peddler, you know, is able to offer her
Mm-hmm.
something colorful that attracts her in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
just in her most natural way, that she, yeah, likes bright things. So when everybody wears dark things, it's something that yeah, I'm not sure
Yeah.
how much I want to spin as not negative.
Yeah. So we can keep it as like, I agree it's drab. I would, but we always want to twist her to that like desire for this to be a positive experience
Mhm.
because we want to keep that. So, and I wouldn't be afraid with her character to have her think before she speaks. So, because it'll come off making her sound more reflective
Mhm.
because she's thinking before she's speaking. And it'll allow you distance. It'll allow you to explain her answers before she says anything. So I would have her look around and be like, you know what? It is drab. And then have her take a second and wish that she had done something else about it. Right. Like, even though Easter is out of season, it would have been great. Like, maybe I should have brought in some brighter colors. This would have been better with brighter colors. Oh no, I'm already like messing this up. Does that make sense? Make her more self-deprecating because we'll relate to that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that is helpful. I
Yeah.
don't see it quite working exactly like that, but
No,
I
you
see
can take
the
it what
concept.
I'm just giving you an example. You can take it whatever
Right.
way you
Yeah.
want.
No, the
But
concept work. That makes sense.
relate immediately connect it to I wanted the party to go well and it's drab. Oh no. Internally. And then have her say out loud, it is a little drab, isn't it? And then have her reflect on like something, she says this like Easter will be here soon enough, though, she replied. You have her saying it with like a regretful sigh. So make sure we're putting in there just a note about like her desire to turn the conversation positive, right? Like maybe she can offer Marianne some hope, right? Easter will be here soon enough, though. And then you'll start to contrast her voice with Marianne, who's going to stay negative while Eleanor's trying to take the conversation to a more positive place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And then we relate to her and we're like, oh man, Marianne is a negative Nelly. And we're like, but Elanor is at least trying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so we get this piece. Did I have it? I don't remember. Elanor looked closely at the normal one. Oh, this is her description of Marianne. Um, there's an interesting thing here where like you create distance between Elanor and everyone, which isn't necessarily bad. But I think it just needs to be intentional. Does that make sense? If you
Mhm.
give me the positive emotions in the first page, creating distance between her and Marianne won't be a big deal
Right.
because I'll be like relating and sympathizing to her. Um, okay, you have this paragraph here, but it is Lent, and some things are simply not right. Elanor demurred, hoped Marianne would take the hint, no matter the circumstances. She held Marianne's gaze for a moment, but did not smile, though it pained her to be so severe with her former friend. But I must, as the queen said. What are you going for here in this paragraph?
So this is supposed to be her kind of answering Marianne's implied question, because Marianne doesn't say, so, that thing I asked you, that favor
Mm-hmm.
for earlier, that Eleanor didn't actually reject as she should have, and the
Yeah,
queen had that whole conversation that no, you can't let that happen. Um, this is her answer and trying to make it definitive, like that. Okay, I'm not going to
gotcha.
compromise for you. Um,
Have Marianne ask it again here.
okay,
Because she doesn't. She says, not that you haven't done a fine job arranging the dinner, I'm sure. I would have Eleanor say, well, thank you. Because this is like, that's what she wants to hear. Like, I've done a fine job arranging the dinner. And then have Marianne be like, so that thing we talked about, right?
right.
Make that connection for the reader. Because I read the first chapter and I wouldn't have made that connection here. Now, some readers are smarter than me and might have. But assume they're dum dums like me and are going to be like, what's going on? Uh,
Well,
yeah,
my other question was, would it make sense for it to be articulated in Eleanor's thoughts? Because she could be translating like, oh yes, that's also because she kind of is, when she thinks
she
Marianne is
is.
thinking of something else, but she doesn't think it very explicitly. But
Yeah,
I don't think either of them are the kind of people who would want to say it super explicitly. Like it's not Marianne's character to just outright ask, and it's not Eleanor either to outright say no. Like there's
gotcha.
that's
So
why I
yeah,
want them direct, but maybe Eleanor thinking it through shows that she gets the
E-
subtext.
Eleanor thinking it through would be great. I would add to the tension here too, if you're going to go that way.
Hmm.
Make it uncomfortable. So have Marianne say like, not that you haven't done a fine job arranging this dinner, I'm sure, and have Eleanor go, thank you, and then like wonder if Marianne really means it, and then say thank you, and then have Marianne sigh, and have Eleanor wait for a second, and have Marianne kind of look around the room, and then have Eleanor remember like she's probably waiting for an answer on this thing, and then let Eleanor speak. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
drawing it
I,
out.
yeah, and like and part of that is we want to pull out that like awkward interaction between them.
Mhm.
And when we get to that place where Marianne is like, oh, where Eleanor's like, oh, she probably wants to answer that thing, I'd go ahead and put the motivation of trying to follow the queen's lead first. We want the
Mhm.
positive motivation up top, where Marianne's like, I really needed to do what the queen recommended. And then she can kind of stumble through this thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
more positive.
Yeah, more positive. Like, give us her positive motivations up front so that we can like connect with what she's doing. Um, in this next section, you have like Marianne responds, and Eleanor's like, you kind of ended the friendship when you asked me for this selfish thing. And you have this line, still Eleanor looked wistfully at Mary after Marianne as the noblewoman melted into the crowd of courtiers seated below. There's a nice place here where you can have Eleanor reflect on her position. You don't need it, it's not a necessity, but there's just a nice place here where she can reflect on her position and how it's impacting her personally. In essence, her like mental health. Is
Mhm.
she lonely? Does she wish that this could be different? What is this kind of messing up for her? It leaves you open to nice character development later.
Okay. Yeah.
Not necessary, but we're at the end of a segment here. We're like, we've ended our conversation with Marianne and we're about to move into the memory.
Mhm.
Um, and so, it's a good place for a moment of reflection.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that before we move into the memory?
Um, well, I like getting, yeah, articulating it makes sense because I thought, well, maybe I just want to show it, she's sighing, she's looking wistfully, but she is the kind of character I think, yeah, that would make sense for her to actually reflect, as you said.
Yeah, and there's a wistful sigh here that could be about I wish our relationship had gone differently, and could be like I wish she hadn't have done that. So a
Mhm.
lot of times we got to make body language clear. Does that make sense? Like, you've got three tools to communicate a character's expectations and meaning. And it's vocalization, internal thought, and body language. And when we're having a big feeling for a character, you typically need at least two of them. You typically need like inner thought and body language, or vocalization and body language, or like, vocalization and inner thought, right? Like you usually need in big moments of transition, you usually need two. If you want a really big emotion, give me all three. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so I liked this memory. It's the first time we see her positive about things. It's really good. It's so good. I want you to slow it down here. So, she gets excited. The maid had just come in to answer her summons, but not before he added, I see so much potential in you for things. And you had written, um, yes, he said that after being very generous with his compliments of her skills, which made her blush even now. So let's give her like some excitement around this. Like, he said that, period. After being very generous with his compliments of her skills, period. It made her blush even now, period. Right? Like, just slow me down a little bit and let me sit in this positive memory with her for a second.
Yeah, no, I like that. That rhythm is better. Hmm.
Yeah, well, and I could tell that was kind of what you were going for with the commas, that like, but I think I just think the hard stops here will be because you had it separated by commas, which kind of got to it, but I think the hard stops would be better. Um,
She doesn't have a lot of those.
yeah, and I think, if she doesn't have a lot, like giving her one is going to be really good. Um, it'll really pop her voice.
Mhm.
Okay. After graciously greeting the Baron from the southern region of the province, she turned to Raymond with raised eyebrows. You have to show me that greeting. That's why she's at the dinner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's
You can't
probably the
summarize the reason for the dinner. And she wants it to go well. So she has to, like, we have to see it going well. Ideally, we'll see her being a little anxious about it too. Yeah. Even though it's a meaningless conversation,
right.
right? And when you have is the does the Baron come back at all? Is he a repeating character?
Much later, not in himself,
Okay.
a whole lot, but Yeah, he's connected to people and
Okay.
situations.
So I would make his voice super big. Like really like big, huge, loud character trait. So how do you imagine him?
Uh, well, he's in it. He should be, super confident, but he's also in the awkward situation of representing people who rebelled against the crown. So,
Ah, okay.
um, he's not exactly in the um the high ground,
Super
really.
confident guy.
So
There's
he might be nervous and he might over project because of
gotcha.
that.
Oh, over projecting is great. Have him
Mhm,
over project everything. Right? And to the point of where it's awkward and weird. And that'll push Elanor and how she responds. You don't need a ton of exchanges, right? Like the Baron shows up and she says, "Oh, welcome, Baron. I'm so, pleased to be your companion tonight for dinner," and have him be like, "Companion, I'm so pleased. This is exciting, especially after all of the trouble that's been happening. The trouble that we won't mention tonight, we don't need to talk about. No one needs to say anything about it." Right? Like tonight, we're all just companions. Everyone is a companion here. Right? Like just give me that like huge voice so that he becomes memorable and we have something for Elanor to play off of. Does that make
mhm.
sense?
Yeah.
And again, like 3 exchanges, and then she can turn to Raymond. Like she says something, he says something, she says something, he says something, she says something, he says something, and then she can turn to Raymond to talk. Yeah. Giving us those like hazard characters, those really big characters that your lead characters have to swerve around helps us relate to your lead character because again we've all had these people that like we don't actually want to talk to but we have to out of work responsibility, so it's a great moment for us to connect and relate to Elanor again. um yeah, okay, any thoughts about that?
That makes sense. There's just a certain proportion that, like, well, he's not going to show up for a long time, but as you pointed out, as a hazard character, it's a good function for him. He's
Yeah,
not
get
like
him
a big
big. It
proportion.
like if you make him big and then bring him back all the time he becomes obnoxious. But if you make him big and we only see him like once or twice, fantastic, right? Like that's what we want out of our big, huge characters.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so here you have this line, just beyond the Duke, however, sat the Queen, and between small talk with her own assigned diplomat, Eleanor noticed after a time that the Queen had absorbed Raymond's companion in a conversation, and her brother sat silent with a brooding look. Um, she's making small talk with this Duke again. So we kind of need to see it as she notices this stuff.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make so much of the interaction too, because
Yeah.
her mind is more on Raymond. Like she can do the small talk and be noticing this thing, and so I think that that's the focus.
Yeah.
But
And that's what I
um,
want. I want her doing the small talk and noticing Raymond
mm,
and like half paying attention to the small talk as she does it. Now, if you don't want to do that, just cut it and get to the conversation with Raymond. Does that make sense?
yeah, I guess okay. I was just imagining that it needed some sort of transition of why is she talking to Raymond instead of
You can
um
do it up here. Like when
but
he
yeah,
when you end the introduction, have the Duke turn and talk to the person next to him. And then she's like free to talk to Raymond. Like
right.
you can get to it faster. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the slight issue of the Queen is taking Raymond's job. Like she doesn't think he's handling his diplomat.
Yeah.
Which is a tension that came up more in chapter two.
Okay.
With yeah, Raymond and the Queen we've seen
Yeah, yeah.
before, which Eleanor knows, but yeah,
Okay.
a little lost in there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it just gets a little well, it's not that it gets a little. Avoid summarize you Eleanor is gonna speak so seldom. Avoid summarizing her conversations.
Mm.
When she has to vocalize, we need to see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because you've got her so internal that when she has to vocalize, force her to vocalize so that we can see it.
Mhm.
Um, okay, let's talk about her trying to be playful. When her companion was engaged by the Baron on his right, she turned to Raymond and murmured, "Just because it's Lent doesn't mean you have to look gloomy, you know." Now, this is a play on something that he said to her earlier
Right.
about looking gloomy. Um, it's it's funny, but we can't tell if she's joking or not. So just add a couple words that tell us that she's trying to make him laugh. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't, like, he kind of chuckles, a forced smile. Elanor chuckled and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. That was
No,
Raymond's."
he doesn't chuckle. He just,
Yeah,
yeah.
Raymond startled from his reverie, gave a painfully forced smile.
Oh,
Elanor chuckled and said, "Actually," and so wait, does Elanor say this line?
yes. That's Eleanor's line. I guess is that
Okay.
ambiguous? She reacts to his painfully forced smile with the chuckle and that line. Maybe that's
Gotcha.
something that I need to re-paragraph or something to.
Yeah, I do paragraph space. I do conversational spacing like this. Raymond
Mhm.
startled from her reverie and uh gave a painfully forced smile.
Yeah.
That's his part of their exchange. Right? Like, even though it's nonverbal, that's his like participation. So now you have Eleanor chuckled and said, "Actually, in that case, you better stick to frowning because what are you upset for?" So like this is that, like, we can cheat grammar a little bit here to let the reader know that like this is she's going to speak again.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was just afraid that the causality was a little funky.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like
No, I think it
it's so
works.
bad.
Yeah, I think it
But
works.
if it's, yeah, it looks like a dialogue, then it looks like a response.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's no really right way to do this. Like there's no like right or wrong. This would be my preference, but you can play with it and come up with a different way to do it. There's no right answer here. The key is just to make sure that we that the reader always know who's speaking.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
This was all great. Their conversation's really good. I loved having her like talk. I didn't really have any notes for you. I think it's a really great, you got a
You're
really
welcome.
strong page here. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, and it's nice. There's nice conflict to it. There's nice tension. Like once you get her talking, you've got her voice in a really good place. Um, and that's what I'm saying is that like part of what's hard about her is that she doesn't talk much. So, once you get her in a place of vulnerability where she's willing to open up, she's actually a really nice character to spend time with. But those come so rarely that you've really got to be strategic with the places where she's all anxious and worried. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah. So at this point, the old man shows up during the banquet and yells at Raymond, and Raymond's like, "Let the dude speak," because the guards are going to lead him out. It's a nice kind of medieval banquet trope that we see a lot, which is perfect. Readers will love it. Like, yay, the old crazy person coming into the room. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which is always funny because it's always like, how did they get in there? But yeah, it's great.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's an explanation for it. Do you think the trope is enough that nobody's ever going to really ask very hard for the explanation? Because the explanation there is that no, he's not a random crazy person. But I'm not entirely sure that any of the characters will ever get to learn why it is. So
Oh, what
I'm
is
just
it revealed that he's not a random crazy person? Does he come back, or is this just backstory you have in like a the book Bible?
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, because there are a number of things where like, oh yeah, that was an angel. Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah, where it's okay, not necessarily going to be spelled out, but
Yeah.
some characters potentially could make the connection, but it
Okay.
wouldn't be, yeah,
So the reader won't make that assumption.
right.
So what I would do is at this point, hold on, let the man speak. I would have the Baron turn to Elanor and say something about, "Wow, y'all just let any random person walk into your banquet," and then have Elanor be like internally think like, "I don't think that's what happened." and then say, so create the moment of mystery for the reader. So when a character does figure it out, the reader feels like you've set up that mystery already. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? If we're
Yeah,
going to solve a mystery for the reader, let's set the mystery up so that the reader knows the mystery's there. Get your bonus points. If you're going to get bonus points from the reader, make sure you set the bonus points up to earn. Yeah.
right. I guess I just
Um,
wasn't entirely sure if the reveal was going to happen for sure or not.
yeah. Either way, it's a fun when weird things like this happen, especially tropes happen that you're like, oh, this is happening again. Go ahead and have characters comment on it because it tells the reader, like, it's kind of like a wink to the reader. It's like, we know, I know, we all know.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so here you mention in your comment that like she wrinkles her nose at the stench of him approach, but she didn't look away. Something ragged about the stranger fascinated her. Was it his eyes? You were mentioning that you actually wanted this to come off as a positive.
Yeah, that everybody's noticing that he smells. Not everybody's looking at him. Like people are looking away, probably is more the general impression, but
Okay.
she focused on him.
Yeah. So give me that. Give me that everyone's looking away from him. People are hiding their eyes from him. They don't want to acknowledge that he's there before she thinks this.
Mhm.
And then have her reaction to him be a contrast, focus less on how he smells and more about on the fact that she doesn't want to, that she actually wants to pay attention to him. Again, that's like taking what's happening and focusing on the positive instead of the negative so that we relate to her and are like, oh, she's having empathy for this guy. Like we want to be a part of that journey with her. I like the noticing of the eyes. It's an important thing for her to do, to connect to his humanity in that way, which is,
Right. Or
except
not
if he's an
humanity.
angel, yeah, or his angelicy. I don't think that's a word.
He's not being a crazy person. She
Yeah,
does
yeah,
identify by
her
looking at his
like,
mouth.
yeah, her like, let me actually pay real attention to you. Um, what sort of doom is this? The prince asked. There's like 7 ways I can read that line. What sort of doom is this? He can be laughing. He could be genuinely nervous. He can like yawn during the middle of this, like, oh, what sort of doom is this? Right? Like, so give me the body language to interpret how he says it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was hoping. So Eleanor looks at him because she doesn't get it from his tone. His tone is flat or like level enough that she's not sure if there's anything going on. So there's definitely not a laugh, definitely not something there. And so she's
Okay.
looking to try and figure it out, and she still doesn't get it. So I wanted it to be a little mysterious.
Okay.
I
Well,
don't know if the absence feels like I just left it out instead of
no, if it
inscrutable.
is, I will always bow to you being strategic over general notes. So if it's strategic and you did it on purpose, leave it.
Right. Well, I was just wondering if it's too late, like for the next part, like Eleanor's response is like his tone is inscrutable.
No, I think
If
that's
that makes
great.
sense.
I think her translating him is great. I think that's a really good. I didn't realize you had done it on purpose. I was like, oh, this was vague. And then Elanor thinks it was vague. I didn't make the connection that like that's on purpose. But I'm an editor looking for problems. So if I say something's a problem and you're like, no, I did that on purpose, ignore me. Um, that doesn't just go for me, that goes for all editors. If an editor is like, I don't like your paragraph spacing here, and you're like, well, I did that paragraph spacing on purpose because I think it does this thing, go with your gut and ignore the editor. Because we are looking for problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that it's doing what I wanted it to do. Just because I did it because I wanted to do this thing. If it
No,
doesn't give that impression, then it's
no, I think it's great. I like it now that you've explained it to me. Um, is it something that a reader is like, I don't like this line pairing, so I'm not going to read the rest of this book? Nah. No, I don't think any reader would ever say that ever. So, yeah, it's not that important. I think it's great. Um, okay, so here you have this line, nothing and no one can ever get past me to the princess. The prince declared loudly. The princess hasn't been a part of this conversation. So that's a little weird.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if the part because he mentions the kingdom before he mentions the princess. Um,
Where does he
but
mention the kingdom? Or where does
I
he
think
mention
I
the
have left up there.
princess?
You're right here. So the kingdom hangs in the balance, and the princess as well.
I
Uh,
missed in the princess as well. I read right past it.
yeah. So I probably need to make that come out a little bit more because it is supposed to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah,
Um,
I missed it. I went for some reason I read the kingdom hangs in the balance.
mm,
Vigilant you must be. I just skipped that whole line. So I'd put them together. The man went in a shaking voice. Let me read it. The kingdom hangs in the balance. The man went on in a shaky voice, pointing in the air, and the princess as well. Vigilant you must be. So I think the problem is that like if this were a standalone line where it looks like this, the kingdom hangs in the balance, the man went on a shaky voice, and the princess as well. That emphasizes it.
mhm. Or I could
You,
have Eleanor's response in between, like,
yeah,
"Oh,
you could put
me
Eleanor's
too."
response like, "Is he talking about me?" And then if you really wanted to have fun, have the Baron go like, "I think he's talking about you." So when you put it in like this, though, it gets lost in this last. We always remember the last thing somebody says. That's just the general rule. The other way to do it would be the kingdom hangs in the balance and the princess as well. The man went on in a shaky voice, pointing in the air. Vigilant you must be. Like that helps us see the princess as like a climax and not a preface to the next sentence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and especially if
Yeah.
she's yeah, separate.
Yeah. I like her responding to it more because you do kind of lose her a little bit when he's talking to the
Right.
so yeah, I like that better. But it's totally up to you. I really like it if you put the Baron in there because I think he's gonna be fun. But you're like, I'm not putting the Baron in there, Jeff. Uh
Well, it would be, as you said, him being nice and big and
yeah, be fun. But I know you're like, no, that's not what the tone is I'm going for. That's okay. Ignore the editors when you're being strategic. Okay, so this makes perfect sense. You can totally ignore my note. It's a nonsense note. Okay, here I want you. So her brother scoffed. A dragon? You think an old wives' tale? Uh, you think an old wives' tale something to fear? He stood and raised his goblet. I will fight and defeat any such beast that appears single-handedly. And then he drained the cup. So he's got kind of two thoughts here, and they're both very big statements. Does that make sense? Like they're both like crowd pleasing, I'm performing for the room statements. Whether or not he intends that,
yeah,
that's what
yeah.
they
It's a
are.
big statement.
Yeah, it's a big statement. So give me the crowd reaction. You give me the crowd reaction after his second one. Give me the crowd reaction after his first one to show us that he's like playing the crowd. Does that make
Silence.
sense?
Yeah.
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 Um, this is just me messing with language. You can ignore that. Uh, yeah, so here, Elanor turned to Raymond. He was now sitting to face someone flushed, perhaps from wine, but certainly not only that. So she kind of pivots here.
Mhm.
Let her talk to him for a second so that we can see that he's off. Does that make sense? Before she's like, I have to save the room.
Mhm.
Let us feel because she feels this conflict and tension here around like he's not going to help me. I have to save the party on my own. Let us see the fact that he's not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Um, okay, this last part. She suggests for the minstrel to go and play a song.
Yeah. So that's probably something that I need to like reword to make clear because I think somebody else had noted this before that wait, she said this? No, it's actually the queen who gets the page.
Oh, I
So
didn't. I was
right.
putting it with Elanor because page
Right.
was moved.
Yeah, so there's probably something I need to line up with the page because Eleanor is thinking that she's gonna go get a page and then she sees, oh wait, the queen already did that. There's already a page who's come up to her,
That's
and so the
really
queen is
interesting.
just one step ahead of her in thinking
Okay.
and acting out Eleanor's plan, but she also does it in a different way. So Eleanor, is frustrated at the way it plays out. She's like, I would have given him some more instructions, maybe she said. he doesn't, just aggravate the situation by talking about
Okay.
dragons.
I'm going to encourage you to change this.
Okay.
Leave the queen out of it.
Mm,
Because you're setting up at the beginning that Elanor really wants the party to go well. And then Elanor feels like the party isn't going well. And she turns to Raymond and tries to get him his help, and he is not helpful. So let her try to take action here and give her, instead of observing things, give her some actual like true what do you call it? Agency.
mhm.
Have her pull the minstrel over, have her tell him it's time to play. I think where the confusion is coming in is in this line here. I know it's not customary to entertain minstrels at this time of year. She declared. We are assuming that she is Elanor
Right. Because they are thinking on the same lines of like,
because they
oh,
are
this is
thinking on the
hunting
same
time.
lines. Yeah.
But yeah.
But I would have this be Elanor. Have her say that he's going to play. Right. And then give her in this paragraph here, give her a moment where she's thinking, like, I'm rocking this party. Like, this is the best. I'm crushing it. And then you have this moment where he starts singing and she starts begging Raymond to make him change. And Raymond does make him change once. And then he starts singing another song about a dragon, and she begs Raymond to make him change again, and Raymond does make him change again. Again, you're removing the agency from her.
Yeah. I I kind of think that that made sense for the fact that later on she's going to be kind of undermining her own agency as well.
Yeah.
Too, that like her response should be is to go directly to the minstrel, but she, like the queen, doesn't think she can be heard, but she knows Raymond can, and so
Yeah.
she's going to defer to him a little bit more than she should to try to resolve the situation.
Yeah. I would just have him refuse
Mm.
and so there's two ways to go with it. One way is to have the man start singing, have her panic, like, oh no, I've messed this up. Have her turn to Raymond and be like, go help. And you've established above that Raymond is not going to be any help. So he's going to refuse and then have her bumble over and get it changed. That would be one way to go. And then you can end with her like regretting the fact that she tried to do this thing and she completely failed. Does that make sense? The
Yeah.
the other way to go about it is to have her proud of herself for getting the minstrel singing, have Raymond turn to her and be like, really? You're gonna have him sing songs about dragons? And then have her kind of like panic but be too afraid to change it. And then plead him to change it and have him be like, fine, and have him get up and change it. The like, I'm recognizing my own mistake and then sending Raymond to fix it puts her in an awkward position because she's imagining harm. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like, it's not clear that anyone else would be bothered by this.
Right. I mean, I think that's why I thought of it as like the queen initiated this action and then she feels like she's doing damage control. She feels like she's doing damage control in the whole situation.
Yeah.
People are all discussing this topic and it's upset the dinner. Okay, I
Yeah.
gotta fix that. And she
But
feels like she's a step behind, maybe. Yeah.
if the queen launches the minstrel,
Hmm.
then she's not fixing anything. And then if Raymond fixes the minstrel, then she's also not fixing anything. She's just passively judging what other people are doing. And that's what we have to get her away from. We have to
Mhm.
get her away from sitting in passive judgment or passive aggressive judgment of what other people are doing. And we have to get her positive intention expressed. And so give her the like a little bit of agency to try to fix the problem somewhere in here. If you keep the queen having the minstrel, then have her take agency to try to fix it. It gets messed up again. She tries to fix it again, and then have Raymond comment like, "How many songs are you gonna have him sing?" Right? Like, so get her, like, give her somewhere in this agency to like do it herself, even though it's
Mm.
gonna fail, so that she's not sitting in this place of like passivity where she's like trying to get other people or fail, or other people are beating her to the punch all the time. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, I see like, oh yeah, that would push her forward, but I feel like actually might push her further than I want her to be because that will be the problem the next time we see her is her failing, like her having that too much passivity. So I feel like she's not
Well,
actually
so
there.
if she goes forward and fails, then it
Mm,
makes sense that next time she's not going to try,
yeah,
right? But you need her making choices besides I'm going to judge people,
right.
or
Mm,
I'm going to judge things, because it really it really makes her unlikable.
yeah, it does drag things.
It does. It makes her like, oh my gosh, can you just like
Do
if
something.
you're not going to do something about it, leave everybody alone. Does that make sense? Like, yeah,
Yes. And I do want her that to get annoying because it's what also pushes Raymond to a breaking point in the next chapter that's from
yeah,
her perspective. So um it's
but
definitely a flaw that I want there to be clear in her, but I yeah,
yeah,
don't want to overwhelm people with it, I guess.
I think the flaw, I think her trying to combat her flaw of passivity and it failing actually works to your advantage
Hmm.
over her just living in her flaw. Her just living in her flaw is obnoxious. Her knowing her flaw and then failing to combat her flaw, or trying to combat her flaw being a failure, and so going deeper in her flaw, is character growth, even though it's character growth in the wrong direction. It's
Right.
character growth, and we want to see her growing. We don't want to see her stuck where she's at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a lot of options with this last section. You just have to at some point, either in her recommending the minstrel, or in and then feeling like a failure when he starts to sing about dragons, or in the queen recommending the minstrel and then her trying to change it and failing to change it and then begging Raymond to change it, right? Like, we need her at some point to try and fail
Hmm.
so that we can relate to her, because we try and fail. So if she tries and fails, we're like, yeah, we get it. If she just sits passively and begs him to go act for her, we're like, look, get up and do something. Why are you complaining all the time to his brother? Go do some things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the ending is strong. The last couple of paragraphs are good. Um, you bring back the stranger, which is great. Again, because you bring him back here at the end, I would solve the mystery of him at some point, of his eyes.
Hmm.
Um, because you just hammer them in a good way. You hammer them hard. So I'd solve that mystery at some point. Um, yeah. Anything else about the piece you want to talk about?
Oh, that's a lot of great helpful things. I mean,
Okay.
um, one thing I guess is, uh, I think I mentioned maybe before the queen, if it feels like odd for her to kind of be there, but not very noticeable. Um, but
No,
it, or if
because
it's just like just the setting that oh she's a few seats down
yeah,
and she's
she's a
not
few seats
very
down.
involved.
Yeah, and you know her. Like, I don't need her more in this. I want more Elanor. I don't want more Queen.
It is
Yeah.
Eleanor's scene and it's Eleanor's dinner. Eleanor's the one who put it together,
Yeah.
so yeah,
And
it's
it's
not.
and we're here, we're traveling with Elanor through this journey.
And Raymond.
Yeah, and Raymond. But in this chapter specifically, we're traveling with Elanor. So we don't really care what the Queen's doing until she starts impacting Elanor directly. We don't care about her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to be with Elanor and Raymond. So you do a great job of keeping us with Elanor and Raymond. And I clearly also want to be with the Baron because I think he's going to be a lot of fun. But mostly with Elanor and Raymond. So I was just teasing. But yeah, it's that like, I don't you give me enough description of what she's doing and where she's at. I don't need more of her in this.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and for the epigraphs, I don't know. I mean, those are also the kind of thing that plenty of readers can skip anyway.
The
And
things at the top.
yeah, at the t
Yeah, I skipped them. I didn't read them.
okay. That's totally fine because I'm sure there will be readers who, yeah, for
Some
the
readers
story,
love
it's not
these and they're like,
necessary.
these are the greatest thing ever. And some
Right.
readers are like, I don't care.
Right. It's
Yeah.
italic skip. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right. Well, I
So
knew
you can read
you were
them.
asking me about the character voice. So I was like, these don't have anything to do with the character.
Right. No,
Yeah.
they don't. They just they're more for the setting and more for yeah, mostly the idea of like whether or not um they make sense with the what happens of the chapter. But if you
Which
didn't
one
read them,
which one do you like? I skim them.
yeah, I mean, I like this the second one for the fact that it, says something at the end of like, oh yeah, after relating this incredible story about this saint being swallowed by a dragon and then bursting forth out of it. Um, what is said here, however, about the beast swallowing the maiden, bursting asunder, is considered
Yeah.
apocryphal and not to be taken seriously. And the date that this is written, it's actually so this is a real thing. I didn't make it up.
Yeah, yeah.
This is
I assume they were both
contemporary.
real. Yeah.
They are both
Yeah.
real. It's just they're from different times, and this one is more contemporary to their setting, and it shows that yeah, they're gonna take things like dragons as
Yeah.
apocryphal. Um, the other one has more of the sense of, oh yes, story with the dragon, that's
Hmm.
exciting and details, but
No, I'd go
uh,
the second one.
yeah, with that impression of the like the Baron saying, no, dragons, what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
Okay.
it's fun.
But yeah, also helpful because I know, yeah, epigraphs are not everyone's cup of tea.
Some people love them. Like I used to read a ton of leadership books, and there's always epigraphs at the beginning of the leadership book that's like, some kind of quote about what you're about to
Right.
see. Yeah. And so I used to write them down and actually keep those quotes because they were always really good. So yeah, I think there's times when people love them. I'm a bad judge of that though. Uh, but yeah, I like how you describe the second one. I think it's fun. That's awesome. I'd keep
They're
that
great
one.
for setting. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for all the voice help though. That was very,
Yeah,
very
you
helpful.
got it. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. We can talk a little bit more.